Hey, In2Picklers, welcome to episode, I think we're on 17 of podcast Pickleball Therapy. This is our podcast designed for your pickleball improvement. We try and bring you information that will help you improve as a pickleball player. This week, we're going to continue our series on paddles. What we're going to be talking about this week, we're going to be talking about the composition of paddles. We're going to be talking about the different thicknesses of paddles, the core of paddles, the face of paddles, and things like that. If you're interested in knowing more about paddles, stay tuned. Every week, players ask Lori or me about the In2Pickle Academy. They want to know more about our online courses and what they're about. If you're interested in knowing more about the In2Pickle Academy, you can visit In2Pickle.com and you'll be able to link to a video that explains the In2Pickle Academy. Or better yet, join us for one of our free 30-minute workshops. During the workshop, you'll learn a thing or two and learn about the Academy. See you in class. If you know anything about the history of pickleball, pickleball started with wood paddles. So the original paddles, the way I've understood and read this history of pickleball, were made out of plywood. So basically, they cut some paddles out of plywood. They just made the shape of a paddle out of plywood, gave their family a wiffle ball and said, go out on this badminton court and enjoy yourself. And that's kind of how pickleball started. So the original paddles in pickleball were wooden paddles. That's what people used. Some people made really fancy ones. Even today, you can still find some really fancy wooden paddles, custom-made paddles and things like that. And you can still find some wood paddles out in the general market. They're usually the less expensive paddles. We don't recommend using wood paddles to play pickleball, not because we don't love the history of the game, but because there's so much better pickleball paddles available today. The honeycomb core paddles that, as I understand it, Steve Paranto's father, Arlen Paranto, was instrumental in bringing to the game, have really revolutionized the way that we play pickleball, giving us a much lighter paddle without sacrificing the feel of the game, actually making the feel better, but without sacrificing playability, if you will. So they're still stiff enough that you can play well with them, but they're light because they're honeycomb, and they give good feedback. They give good feel, much better than a wood paddle would. So we recommend you can pick up fiberglass or not fiberglass, honeycomb core paddles nowadays for even as low as $25 or $30. So our position is that if you're going to play pickleball with any kind of seriousness, that you basically invest in a core paddle, some sort of a honeycomb core paddle. Even the ones on Amazon are pretty decent instead of a wood paddle. But anyway, so you have the wood paddle as kind of the beginning of the sport. Then we went to the honeycomb core paddle, which is still the standard today. The honeycomb core paddle, you can talk about different thicknesses, you can talk about different faces and things like that, but the basic middle of the paddle, the core of the paddle, remains primarily honeycomb core. If you look at even the new amp line by Selkirk, the Vanguard, the latest line, is still a honeycomb core paddle. Even the Pro Kenix, the Kinetic, which is a pretty thin paddle, is a honeycomb core paddle. So that's kind of the basic paddle that's out there. The other material that you hear about in paddles is the carbon fiber paddle. That's primarily Gearbox, I believe, is the main purveyor of those paddles. So that's a different type of construction than the traditional polymer honeycomb core paddle that you see out there. There's also one material that was used a little bit more historically is the Nomex core. The Nomex core is a core that we're not big fans of either because of the fact that it can be very harsh on the arm. But the Nomex core is another type of core that you might see out there. But pretty much, I would say, if I had to guess, I'd say 90% of the paddles in play are probably basic polymer honeycomb core paddles with different width and things like that. So what I want to talk about is I want to talk for a second about the width of the honeycomb core and how it makes a difference in the playability of the paddle. So if you think about the core of the paddle being kind of like the foundation of it, sort of like the foundation of the walls to a house or something like that. If you have the thinner the walls of a house, the more flexible they're going to be. The more the more they'll move, right? So if you had a thinner core, that core will likely result in a little more flex in the paddle, a little more give in the paddle. When you start getting into thicker core, so if you move, say, from a Babolat paddle or one of the more regular size width paddles, you move from that paddle to a thicker amped paddle like the Selkirk amp paddle. What's going to happen is the amp paddle is going to have less give than the original or the thinner paddles. And so what happens, at least in my experience playing with them, is that the thicker paddles you have less feedback from the ball because the paddle, it flexes less, it responds less to basically the interaction with the ball. So it's a stiffer paddle, which some players like. There's a lot of players that play with the amp line. Engage has a new line out that's kind of between. It looks like it's between the amp line and the more traditional thinner paddles. But those kind of paddles are also, they'll remove some of the feel because of the fact that the feedback from the flexing of the paddle as it hits the ball in your hand will be a little bit less. You'd like to help your friend or family member learn how to play pickleball, but how? Now it's easy. Pick up a copy of Play Pickleball, A Beginner's Guide. It's the most complete guide to playing pickleball. Available as a digital download or in hard copy at In2Pickle.com or at Amazon. Let's keep growing the sport. So that's the core of the paddle. Now, the core of the paddle, obviously, if you just had the paddle and just played with the core, that probably wouldn't work. So you need to have a face on the paddle. And that's where I think the companies really differentiate one paddle from another, and even amongst themselves, is on their face surfaces. What I'm talking about there is basically a thin sheet that they apply over the honeycomb core. They glue it on there, stick it on there somehow, and then they put the edge guard on there. So you have the face of the paddle really is where they distinguish themselves more and more. And so what you'll find is usually in the faces, what you'll find is things like fiberglass, and you'll find some carbon now being used and things like that. So basically, like if you look at a fiber paddle, usually a fiber paddle should give you a little more pop off the paddle. The carbon that they're using now, and they're putting they call it EVA and stuff like that. So they're putting almost like cushioning behind the face a little bit. So like multi-layer the face to give it a different feel. And so, the face of the paddle is going to change the reaction of the honeycomb core, the center of the paddle, and the ball. So really that's what you need to focus on if you want to find the difference between paddle A and paddle B, is focus on one, core thickness, and two, focus on the type of face that you're getting to know the type of interaction that paddle will have with the ball. One other characteristic of how paddles are manufactured that players seem to focus on some is the edge guard. So some paddles have an edge guard on them, kind of keeping everything together. So remember that you have the core in the middle, you have the face on the outside, and the edge guard kind of closes out or seals off the honeycomb core in the middle, and then kind of keeps it all together with the edge guard. The honeycomb core in the middle is kind of a rough, literally a honeycomb. Think of a honeycomb, and if you took a honeycomb and basically cut around it, you'd have kind of rough edges. So if you looked inside a paddle, that's what you'd see. You'd see kind of a rough edge honeycomb. So this edge guard kind of neatly puts it all together. Some paddles they call them edgeless or no edge guard, but they're kind of like this Pro Kenix here. It basically, it's kind of like the edge guard is kind of like built into the face, so it doesn't overlap. I would suggest that it really doesn't make a big difference in your play. I mean, if you're hitting a ton of balls on the edge, you probably need to focus on maybe getting the ball a little more to the sweet spot, more to the middle. But, so edge guard to me is really not a do or die kind of a thing in a paddle, but, it's something that people think about when they're looking at paddles. All right, all that said, so you got your core, you got your face, you got your edge guard. At the end of the day, really what matters the most when you're picking a paddle is how does it play for you. There's other characteristics like weight of the paddle, shape of the paddle, things like that we consider are way more important than the minutia of, is this paddle something sexy like a Sensa core or a amped core or some neat name that's used to market it. What we focus on, instead of the materials of the paddle so much, other than the face, which sometimes the face differences of fiberglass, carbon, and how they're mixed up can make a difference in how it feels. At the end of the day, what matters is how does it play for you. So, maybe you like a thick core with a carbon face. I kind of like the new Vanguard paddle a lot of people are playing with. Perfectly fine. If you like a thinner paddle or thinner core because you like the way it gives you feedback, like I do, I like a thinner core, old school kind of a thinner core. That's what I play with. Then play with that because that's what plays well for you. What I don't think is productive is to get so bogged down in materials that we just start focusing on, okay, I want to get the carbon this and I want to get a fiber that or something like that. That's not really what's going to, make you a better player or give you more satisfaction around the court. What's going to give you satisfaction and playability on a paddle is the paddle that plays best for you. So that's all we're going to say about materials. We, again, don't think that they're super important other than just finding a paddle that plays right for you. Having an understanding of it is fine, and it's always good to have knowledge, but focusing on that really shouldn't be the focus. In the next series, a couple episodes in the paddle series, we're going to focus on some weight issues and some shape issues, which are way more important when you're trying to pick a paddle that's right for you. At the end of the day, however, regardless of what we may say or what you may read online or hear from your friends or whatever, what really matters is to find the right pickleball paddle for you. That was a little bit of a mouthful, the pickleball paddle. That's a lot of P's in there. But, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends. And if you liked it, they probably will too. Stay safe out there.